Well, good morning. Welcome to a little video about cancer. And I'm laughing because I'm laughing at all my ideas. But cancer was one of those ideas that really brought me to God, brought me to my spiritual transformation. I guess if you wanted to look, and it's a little hard for me to now to cast my mind back to 30 years ago specifically. But if you want to look at the idea that we're all on a journey, some of us walking away from God and some walking to, and some sort of thinking about it, we're actually all walking to. Even in walking away, we're walking to. But so I guess I've been on the journey my whole life. Always something about the world never sat well with me, didn't feel right. Why are people this way and that way towards each other? And why is everything so unfair and everything so unbalanced and all of that? And of course, the rejection of the world as it is, and the looking for a more utopian lifestyle and all of that sort of thing, which always fails, always just ends up becoming a repetitious cycle of reinventation, if you like, or reinventing yourself as now I'm this, now I'm that, until finally you just either fall to your knees in prayer or accept that there's nothing else. And I think that's probably more mind-numbing and more painful than the other proposition. So when I was, let's talk about it in time. Oh God, I guess I should go back and do the backstory. When I was a young fella of about 25, I guess, I spent about 10 years employed as a gardener on various island resorts in the Whitsundays. Now, if you don't know the Whitsunday Islands, Google them up. They're beautiful, beautiful places. There's little resorts here and there. And I loved living that lifestyle where I could go sailing, scuba diving, partying with all my friends on the islands, and it was just a young person's paradise, really. And I worked as a gardener, and of course, being in the tropics, it's incredibly hot, and the sun in Australia is very, very strong, and you get burnt very quickly. Within half an hour to an hour, you get a good sunburn here. So part of the working agreement was that the island resorts under the award would provide sunscreen and sun protection hats and all that sort of stuff. And in those days, sunscreens were filled with propylparaben, and the cheaper the sunscreen, I guess, the more crap you had in it. But nobody knew that it was carcinogenic back then. It wasn't. It was considered to be, So for 10 years, I would lather up my arms, my face with sunscreen. And I'd wear a hat, but in the tropics, if you're wearing a hat, after a while, the band around your hat's sodden with sweat and sweat strip. It's not a thing. So most of the time, I wouldn't even wear a hat. So I'd have sunscreen all up over my forehead and whatever. But some period down the track, I couldn't tell you when it started actually, but I started to get this itch in my arms mostly. I started to get this itch, and it became debilitating. For years it went on. It would come and go, and I'd think, what is it? And I would scratch and scratch and scratch until it bled, until my skin bled all up and down both arms, backs of my hands, on my face. Wasn't quite so bad on my face, but it drove me to a point where when I would have an attack of this itching, and it was always like under the skin, I couldn't get at it. When I would have an attack of this itching, when it got to its worst stage, I guess, or its worsening stages, at the beginning it was just like an itch from when you have an insect bite, and you might scratch it for a bit. And then it became many insect bites, and it just on and on and on, and deeper and more intense. I started to think that I should get help. I started to, when you're young, you don't worry about stuff so much. As you get older, you tend to look at all your lumps and bumps. But at about that same time in my life, working on those islands, I'd met a man called Richard, who was the garbage collector on Long Island for the 1 year that I was working there under contract. He was a Christian, and he gave me a copy of the Good News Bible when he left, and he and I had some interesting talks, and he would mostly talk and I would listen. I was interested in meditation and stuff like that, and I'd had a very profound experience on Long Island, going off to meditate one day of the Spirit. And I'd had all these other little things occurring at the same time, even though I was still very much living the party lifestyle and the, happy-go-lucky kind of thing. And so I had these two things going on. I had actually at that stage I didn't have the cancer going on. So that was more of a background of my spiritual birth, I guess, spiritual stage, the beginning of my spiritual. It's hard to remember now looking back, because I do remember going to the Brahma Kumari in Brisbane for a period of time when I was living there to practice meditation. So I was interested in meditation and alternative ways of seeing things at an earlier age than that. But anyway, by the time I'd reached my 30s, I decided that I needed to get something done about this itching in my arms, because it would occur, I'd have a breakout of the itch about the itch. I have to call it the itch. I don't know what word for it. The itch doesn't seem to make it sound particularly insidious, but it was horrific. But I decided that I needed to go and see someone. So I went to a doctor, and the doctor referred me to a specialist, a skin specialist. And I had about 2 or 3 different meetings with people. And eventually, after going to hospital for tests and everything like that, it was revealed I had skin cancer and subdermal solar keratosis. That's what they called it, skin cancer from the sun. And nobody knew about propylparaben back then, so I'm guessing the propylparaben either didn't help or it accelerated the process, but whatever the thing. Anyway, so I was faced with this idea of chemotherapy, which I wasn't excited about at all. And I remember being in a state of shock, kind of a shock, like when someone dies or when something happens and you don't know how to react to it. And I remember the doctor telling me that he wanted to start me on a course of chemotherapy. And I got up and walked out. I don't think I even said anything. I can't really remember. But I remember walking out of the doctor's room and out of the hospital to the car park. And I don't know if it was when I got home or while I was driving or whatever, but I was struck with this idea that I was either going to find God So I must have been fairly advanced on my journey. I knew I was looking for God. I knew that God could heal me, but I was either going to find God or die from my cancer, and the doctor hadn't actually given me a use-by date. So, but and that began that decision for faith. And I'd been reading the Bible that Richard had given me, and it was a Good News Bible. Trying to think who it was that underwent all these horrendous healings in the Bible through faith. Anyway, it'll come to me. But I'd read enough stories about faith and faith healing, and of course the testimony of the disciples of what they witnessed to Jesus doing and things like that. But so faith at that time was already a big part of my perception of life's purpose and my journey and all of that kind of thing. I remember in the decision to heal it with faith, making parallel to that decision, decisions about my life and my living situation, my living conditions, and obviously the food I was eating, and all these sorts of things came into examination. And I actually left my house where I was living out in the hills. I lived a very hippie kind of feral, off-grid existence. But I remember moving onto a commune around the other side of the mountain from where I had my little house, and moving into a teepee. And of course, my ideas at that time were partly fueled by the idea that I had cancer, but also driven by what I would have vaguely perceived as my spiritual quest, even though looking back now, it was more like a disjointed bundle of efforts to try and decipher the meaning of life. It wasn't really a quest in earnest. It was more of a strong interest, I guess, maybe you would say. But so I moved into the community and made myself a teepee and all of that sort of thing, and I was living in a teepee. And I joined the Rainbow Tribe, and I tried to get as far away from everyday living, which I saw as corrupt and pointless and futile. I tried to get away from everything that was normal and common sense as best as I could, as much as I could. And the cancer and the itching and the itch, as it shall from here on now be known, the itch continued to get worse and worse. And I remember going to all sorts of natural healers and people who claimed to be healers and naturopaths and everything. I did find some relief with nettle oil from the naturopath. I would put the nettle oil on my arms and face and back of my neck and things like that. And it would alleviate the itch for probably half an hour to an hour, which when I was having a really bad attack was probably about as long as it would last, about an hour or so. But it was getting to the stage where I would wish that someone could cut my arms off. That's how bad it was. It was just like I didn't care. I just wanted to die, really. And that brought me, I guess, to the dark night of the soul eventually. For a long time in my life, I'd been using alcohol and drugs as a way of coping with the constant babble of the voice in my head that was, if you've ever sat and listened to that voice, you'll know how insane it is. I'd given up drugs and alcohol, I realised that all of that, everything that was impure, everything that wasn't of a pure origin or natural, let's say, as natural as I could, I let it all go. So I started eating raw foods and, all of that sort of thing. Not as a religious observance. I didn't go overboard with it, but I just included more of that in my diet increasingly and gave up alcohol, gave up drugs, which was basically just cannabis and magic mushrooms at that time. And I think I was clear and free of everything for a period of about 3 months. And then one night, I became so depressed that I fell into the dark night of my soul, which is, you can Google it. It's the dark night of the soul is generally the bottom, the lowest you can go. It's the place where, in the Course, Jesus talks about the prayer of the heart, that God put there himself, which is your salvation prayer. That prayer came out of me. I found myself fetal on the rug in my lounge room, in my living room. I had a knife in one hand, a Stanley knife, box cutter knife. And I was going to end my life that night. That was it. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I couldn't take the itch. My arms were always bleeding at that stage and always had scabs over them, and my hands. And I fell to my knees in prayer to know God, to know what I was as spirit. I think about a month before that, I'd torn out the Sermon on the Mount out of the Bible. I'm not sure if I still had the same Bible Richard gave me, but out of the New Testament. Anyway, I tore out the Sermon on the Mount and threw the rest away. And I just wanted those teachings of Jesus. I just wanted that. I just wanted to understand, love thy enemy. I knew that that's what I wanted, even though I didn't know how to put it into practice. Anyway, so I fell into the dark night of my soul, and I prayed and I prayed. I prayed for a way to be helpful, and I prayed for a way to help mankind, because I saw that there were many out there, even amongst my own friends, who were just as confused and lost about life as I was. And I had my awakening. 3 days later, I heard the voice, and or the next morning I heard the voice, but 3 days later, after following the instruction of the voice, and I've done several videos on this, but I found myself in a place where I had my awakening, face to face with God. And I would spend the next 6 years in that place with my teacher, Ted Poppy, who has recently left the continuum, has left the building. But I didn't have my miracle healing of the cancer for about probably, I really couldn't say how long. I would say probably 1.5 to 2 years perhaps after starting the Course in Miracles. So I had my awakening experience, which revealed the truth of life to me. And for the next couple of years, I was flat out doing the workbook. The first year when I did it, I was sort of coming and going from my house. I'd moved off the community back into my house. But I knew I had to leave my house and be there. It was an 1.5 hour drive to the healing centre that I was sent to. Sold my house, moved there, sold everything, gave up my job, had a part-time job, gave that up, moved to the town where I could go to the healing centre. And about 1.5 years later, and this is the whole time like I'm being buoyed up by miracle-minded people and miracle-minded talking, reading, study, everything. But the first year I was there, I didn't really do the workbook lessons with much integrity. I got to lesson 260 something, I think, and realised my great lack of integrity and made a decision come January the 1st the following year, I would begin again in earnest. And the result I got the following year was much more beneficial. Lots of weird shit happened. Pardon me. So one night, I've been drug and alcohol free at this stage for a good 2 years, I would guess. But one night we're sitting watching a television at Vespers, which was our evening service, and watching the television. The video that would be played would always be something transformational, like The Matrix or thing, or it might have been a formal video teaching of the old man who was one of the main teachers through that church that I was at. And on this night, we were watching one of his videos, and he was talking about heart disease and how you're entitled to miracles and all of that sort of stuff. And all the verbiage sounded very familiar to me. It was all the same sort of thing that I've been listening to for the last couple of years and studying. And that night in particular, I had an attack of the itch. And in his video, he said to me, "You there with that heart disease," and he pointed at the screen. And I took it very personally with that heart disease. I knew I didn't have heart disease, but I had cancer. I had a medical condition, right? So you there with that heart disease, all you have to do is stand up and say, "I have no use for this." And without even thinking about it, I stood up and I thrust my arms out in front of me and I said, "I have no use for this," out loud. And of course, we were in a darkened room and there's about 20 people or perhaps a few more watching the video. Everybody sort of looked up at me. And in that moment, I had a heat, like the heat from an iron when you're ironing clothes. It was hot. Went from my fingertips all the way up my arms and up my face, head, like my whole body felt hot, but predominantly my arms. And I was healed of it. That was it. Haven't had it since. 25 years, probably just a little more than that now. So, which brings me to the object, I guess, of this video. Pardon me, it's a little early in the morning. This is my second video for today. I just did a little live one on Facebook. feeling the urge to express and to talk and to put it out there. But the whole point of it is that by your faith alone are you healed. Now it was a long time. I remember thinking it was a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, a few years, which it was, between when the doctor told me I'd had cancer and between when I was healed of it, was probably a period of about maybe up to 3 years. And the framework that had to be put into place, looking back, I can sort of see it, but the framework for that moment had to be put into place, and I had to be in a certain frame of mind so that when the healing occurred, I wouldn't corrupt it. I wouldn't waste it. Because the mind is a powerful thing. And despite the fact that you could say, well, you had a catalyst, which was the propylparaben or the sun or whatever, despite the fact that the externals of the story seem to contribute to it, it's my mind that made manifest the cancer. Now, if you think of the body as a self-repairing mechanism, you get a little paper cut, it heals. You get a big enough cut, you'll bleed out, right? But in general, the body is designed to take a certain amount of abuse and it'll heal from it and all that sort of thing. But the mind can be very confused about its identity, its best interests, its responses, all these sorts of things. And if you can remember, and if you can take it from me, that the original decision of the mind, which brings you to the point where you find yourself here in the physical dimension, the original decision of the mind was to be separate from God. Now, if God is love and God is everything and God is perfect and whole forever and you're part of God because God created you like itself as spirit, the realignment then of your identity of yourself from being a bodily identity, Dave the body, to spirit Dave, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. That transition in thought as a functioning perspective can take some time, right? It's like a relearning, an unlearning and a relearning. And in the taking of that time, that relearning process, so that you don't continue to manifest things from the separation from God mindset, can take a bit, right? And it's different for everybody. There's like a maturity or a maturing up to wholeness, to truth, that, like Jesus says in the Course, miracles are your right, but purification is necessary first. And so I went through that period of purification of my thinking so that when I was healed of the cancer, I wouldn't just re-manifest it down the track. What that is for you in your journey with disease or the itch or whatever it is you're going through, I don't know. But one of the things that I do know is that whilst you can have a spontaneous remission through prayer and all this sort of thing, in general, it's more beneficial to be able to abide, I guess. I don't really quite know where I'm going with this, but it's more beneficial to sort of be able to abide with the spirit it's hard to talk about it, but to be able to abide with the spirit in a way where no, it's not coming through. Well, where the nature of disease that you seem to be suffering from isn't the thing that you're healing. I don't know if that makes sense. So rather than trying to heal the cancer, but even that, like I stood up and it was definitely in my mind in that moment, it was definitely the cancer that I wanted healed, the itch that I wanted healed. But it's more beneficial if you can see it from the point of view that it's not the cancer I want healed, it's my thoughts about it. It's my mind that has made it manifest in the first place. That's what I want healed. Because the mind is a powerful thing and manifests your reality, whether you believe that or not, it doesn't matter. But when you get to a point where you start to have experiences of seeing your thoughts change and your externals change in relationship to your thoughts, you'll be under no illusions that it's your mind that's making up your reality. And so I guess that's where I'm trying to go with that. One problem, one solution. It's like heal the mind that makes it the problem in the first place. Anyway, and I have had a few people, I've got a few people currently that are dealing with cancer, dealing with whatever, and it's like, you're not really dealing with that at all. Right? You're dealing with a belief, a false belief in separation from God. You're dealing with an idea of identity-based association that isn't true. Right? I'm spirit, you are spirit. And it's like, let's be about our Father's business, which in this world is healing, and heal our minds of the false beliefs about ourselves that give rise to, let's say, the victim perception of ourselves, where we seem to suffer and seem to struggle and seem to go through whatever we're going through, medical or psychological or otherwise. So let's heal our mind of the one problem that we think we have, which is that we think we're separate from God, or I think I've got to keep this singular. I think I'm separate from God. And of course, the solution to that problem is that I'm not. Now, that brings me into the place of paradox where it seems like I am. I seem to be an autonomous figure in my own dream, separate from every other autonomous figure, and we're all capable of doing whatever the hell we want. Right? That's, whilst it seems to be a valid perception, whilst you're defending that belief in separation, albeit unknown, but defending it unknowns to you, whilst it seems to be valid, it isn't. It doesn't take much to see that everything in that perspective ends in death, and that if you are life eternal, created eternal as God created you, then obviously there's something out of whack with that perception of yourself. And if Jesus says, I'm spirit, then what is that? Let me find that. I want to live from that. And the orchestration of healing circumstances and healing situations that heal the perception in the mind of my association with myself that seems to be sick, is where I need to be about, rather than healing the sickness itself, because the sickness itself, or the cancer or whatever, bone marrow disease, leukemia, all of these things, it's an effect. It's an effect of my thinking that I'm separate from God, and the defense of that thought. Okay. I will defend, and this is the insanity of the ego, right? I will defend that thought, that belief that I'm separate from God, right up until the point of death, again and again and again and again, over and over and over. And if you don't believe in reincarnation, that's fine. I mean, it's not real, just as the dream in its entirety is not real. But yet we seem to find ourselves here. I seem to find myself here. So I treat it as real whilst I find myself here. It would be foolish and a misuse of denial to try and walk around saying, oh, no, it doesn't matter, it's not real. When clearly it bothers me, when clearly I find myself upset by things and situations and circumstances. Let's not use our spiritual learnings as defenses against being true to ourselves. Right? To thyself be true in all things. Yes, it fucking bothers me. This itch bothers me. I'm not a body, but I'm not going to walk around saying I'm not a body as if that's going to do anything. I need a miracle. Miracles are my right. Purification is necessary first. Let me be about that purification so that I can claim my right to a miracle. And then whatever the catalyst moment for the miracle is going to be, I have no idea. I had no clue. When I stood up in that room that night and thrust my arms out in front of me and said, I have no use for this, I was prompted within to do that. I had no clue that moment was coming. I had no clue that I would stand up and say that I would be healed in that moment that night, as an idea of the bodily association. I had no clue about that. All I knew was that I was in some kind of process of healing, and that I was healing my mind of my beliefs about myself even in the moment where those false beliefs seemed to be so itchy that they drew me back into the bodily identity and completely drew me out of my harmony and affiliation that I had with my emerging sense of spiritual self. But I would always go back to that emerging sense of spiritual self as soon as the itching would abate. I would find myself going back. You're going back, and it's like you forget and then you remember, you forget and then you remember, you forget and then you remember, you forget and then you remember. And it's that process of remembering that the healing of the mind brings about, so that everything outside of me on the physical plane, everything out there externally that seems to attract my thinking towards the physical nature of life, also becomes the catalyst for reminding me, oh, hang on a minute, I'm spirit. I'm not this body, I'm not this thing. And you've only got to look at the insanity of the world, and the reminders are everywhere. It's like, hang on, it's not the insanity of the world, it's the insanity of my own thinking that believes that the world is real. And in your own awakening, of course, you'll experience that the world is not real. You'll experience that it's just a dream, just an illusion. You'll wake up in eternity where you are now, but believing that you're here listening to me making this video. So have faith. By your faith alone are ye healed. If you go the path of chemo, as I know many have, it will do you no good. It may alleviate the symptoms of your immediate condition, but the mind will manifest something else, a car accident, a different disease, whatever. Because the mind that believes in separation is the mind that manifests the witnesses to it. Through the body, through the world, through whatever, doesn't matter. Let the only use for your body be to carry the word of God, to be useful, helpful to those around you, even if it seems like it's only in the very smallest of ways. Even if it seems like you're just making a video as a testimony to your own healing. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But be about your Father's business. And let everything else go. Peace.